Different tests for compost. We spoke about that horse manure can tie up carbon because it can tie up nitrogen because it has so much carbon in it. And so compost tests will look at a carbon to nitrogen ratio. And so you want to, I think it's 1 to 24 is what we're looking for. Yeah, and it might be different from the different materials. And also it'll look at total nitrogen, the different forms nitrogen has. But almost all the commercial composting operations get their compost tested. And so ask to see that test. Ask what nutrients does it have. That would be also let you know if that's kind of a serious operation, doing it kind of right, or if they're kind of fly by night and, you know.
Yeah. So those other points, consider what fertility you already have in the soil from your past crops and calibrate your equipment, same as with manure. Go ahead. So apply compost only at the rate that is optimum for your plant growth. So treat it in a way like fertilizer. And most importantly, pay very close attention to phosphorus levels in the soil by doing soil tests, because we see, we have about almost 30 years worth of soil testing data in the UNH software bank. And we see that some of the soil phosphorus levels on farms are high. And many times it's because of over-application of soil amendments when maybe they didn't need to be spread. Maybe soil testing wasn't done frequently enough along the way. So briefly, fertilizer, these are you hear different, depending on when you went to school and what books you have in your library, you may hear that there are 16 essential elements for a plant to complete its life cycle, or you might hear 17, 18, or 20. I've seen books that say all. I put all 20 up here just to cover our ground. But these are the big three: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Those three elements come from the atmosphere, and plants use them from the atmosphere to grow. Nitrogen comes from both the atmosphere and the N2 gas, and from the soil. And then phosphorus and potassium, the other two elements that plants need in a relatively large amount, come from the soil. And then the rest of these elements that you are familiar with, I'm sure: calcium, magnesium, sulfur, iron, manganese, zinc, copper, boron, molybdenum, chlorine, sodium, cobalt, nickel, and silicon. Those all come from the soil. So you probably, at some point in your gardening career, have picked up a bag of an organic complete blend that is maybe like a Pro Grow or something like that. That may be like a 5-3-4 or something like that. So the big three numbers will be the N, P, and K: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. If you get a bag of fertilizer that is composed of organic materials, and you would know them because you'd turn the bag over and you'd read cottonseed meal, soybean meal, rock phosphate, green sand, things like that, then you're not getting just nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, but you're getting many of these other essential elements. Whereas if you buy a bag of commercial synthetic fertilizer, it'll be those three numbers in a row: 10, 10, 10, or 15, 0, 10, something like that. Those fertilizers only contain nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in synthetic forms. And in that case, you turn the bag over and you would read urea, maybe, or ammonium nitrate, which you don't find too much anymore available to the general public.
Since the city bombing.
Yeah. So different sources of nutrients. So fertilizers can be synthetic. In other words, they're manufactured in a manufacturing facility, or they could be organic sources of fertilizer, which also may be manufactured into a pelleted form so you can spread it. But it's easy to understand what the chemicals are because you've heard of things like feather meal and kelp, etc.
In terms of home gardening and farming, there's been a big movement, at least since '98, to look at phosphorus-free fertilizers. So Amy mentioned the 1505 or something to that effect. So the zero number in the middle, if you could find that, and your soil tested high, which most of our soils are going to test high or very high in phosphorus, that would be beneficial. to helping preserve surface water quality. So phosphorus-free fertilizers, assuming your soil test says that you have enough phosphorus.
So with fertilizers, whether they're synthetic or organic forms, it doesn't matter, but test your soil first before you use them and apply them at the right time for plant growth. So right now would be a lousy time for you to go out and incorporate a bag of 10-10-10 into your garden because the rain is going to wash it all away. Maybe not the phosphorus, but...
And then with that said, the same in concept. So split applications of fertilizer or something else that will help you get the maximum utilization efficiency from your application. So you apply a small amount at the onset of the season, sometime later you apply another amount, and there might even be a third application. Blueberries, we usually always recommend 2 applications. One in mid-May and then the other not to exceed July 4th.
Right, 6 weeks later or something.
6 weeks, yeah.
And then like with a hay crop, you might fertilize in the spring, and then after you take your first cutting, you might put down another application of fertilizer to give that second boost of growth a push. Yeah, so splitting applications is a more efficient and effective way of making sure that you're providing nutrients at the right stage of a plant's growth.
And this organic matter, carbon farming is this new in vogue term, and everyone's really paying attention to carbon and organic matter, and they're trying to really increase the amount of organic matter in the soil. 3 to 5% they're suggesting is your minimum. If you're cultivating your soil regularly and you can keep it at 3%, you're doing well. If you can get up to 5%, hot dog. Permanent raised beds, certainly you could be in the 8 to 12% range. But you know, people are paying, all the farmers I know in the county that are commercially farming are paying a great deal of attention to their organic matter and doing a lot of things to manage that. We spoke about cover cropping. We spoke about reducing the tillage of the whole field. We talked about rotating fields out of production for a period of time, if possible. Buffer strips, things to that effect. So those are practices that would...
measure that?
Soil test will.
Soil test.
Yeah, so pH alone, $5, nutrients and pH 12, but if you wanted organic matter, just an extra $5, $17 will give you that.
Yeah, it's a combustion test that they do in a laboratory.
And the key thing with all soil tests, are you doing it regularly enough so you have a history over time? Our suggestion is to soil test the first year, soil test again the second year. If it's stable, maybe you're okay for another couple, 3 years. If it's not stable and things have fluctuated, then you might test a third year, and then, okay, things have stable, you might wait a couple, 2 years. So, particularly if they recommended you add anything like lime or sulfur, did that lime actually work to raise your pH, or did the sulfur work to lower it? And we recommend using a lab. UNH offers that service, but there's a variety of places that offer the service. We don't recommend those kits that they sell in stores. The accuracy is somewhat questionable, but more importantly, what they could do in terms of pH is really just measure what's called active acidity. What are the free hydrogen ions roaming around in the soil solution, but not the buffer capacity of the soil. What are the hydrogen ions actually on the soil colloid that will resist having the pH raised? So
it's a more accurate test, and it
Yeah.
comes with recommendations. So you're not just told a number, but you're told. You said if you said you wanted to grow strawberries, then you would need to apply this much limestone to get it into the optimum pH range for good strawberry growth. Okay, go right ahead. So rotate with crops that use residual and leachable soil nutrients. Like we said, nitrogen is one of these highly leachable soil nutrients, and so if you went a little heavy on the fertilizer, like it was a year of manure application, you may want to follow up the next year by using a crop that you know is really going to use a lot of nitrogen, like corn would be an example. Do not apply fertilizer during the winter or very, very early spring. Won't do any good. Yep, I think we can wrap up now. Let's rotate crops with legumes. Store fluid fertilizers in labeled containers that are resistant to corrosion and cracking. But here's something that not a lot of people know to do. Store your dry bags of fertilizer granules rolled up, not open to the elements, because a nitrogen fertilizer will actually lose its efficacy nitrogen will volatilize and you'll lose nitrogen fertilizer to the atmosphere if you leave the